What's up guys, my name is Ace, and today in Battlefield 6 we got quite a big update with tons and tons of bug fixes and adjustments. However, in today's video I primarily wanted to hone in on the recoil and spread adjustments that took place, since I did mention there was weapon accuracy and dispersion tuning, but outside of that there weren't too many specifics on this, so we don't really know what changed with which guns and how much. But thankfully, I'm on top of it. I had all of the pre-patch recoil and spread tests done, so we can look at direct side-by-side comparisons, pre-patch versus post-patch, to see exactly what changed when it comes to this accuracy and in some cases recoil adjustments. And then after we go through all of these, I did want to point out a handful of the key changes, at least from this update, that I feel are most important to mention. But of course, if you want to check out the full list of patch notes, it's a very long list. I will leave that linked in the description down below. And without further ado, let's just dive right into these recoil comparisons, starting it off with assault rifles. And with these graphics, the bottom recoil plot, that's pre-patch, whereas the top set of recoil plots, those are all post-patch plots. And I've got to say, when it comes to assault rifles, it doesn't appear they've made any really drastic changes here. If you really look closely, you could see maybe in some cases, it takes a little bit longer for that spread to start kicking in. So you're going to see a bit more of a tail to the recoil plot. So on the bottom end of the recoil plot, there's a little less dispersion there. And also in some cases, you can see it looks like they tightened up the maximum spread a little bit if you look toward the top end of the recoil plots. Like especially with the B36 toward the top end of the recoil plot there, post-patch doesn't seem to be spreading as much as pre-patch. It's also fairly noticeable on the L85. But out of all of the weapon types, I would say assault rifles seem to see the smallest amount of changes overall here. You might see some slight improvements here or there, but nothing too crazy. Next, let's have a look at the Carbine recoil plots, and with these, at least in many cases, this is far more noticeable. Like you can see very clearly with the M4A1, it takes much longer for that spread to start kicking in. You've got much tighter recoil on all of your initial shots fired, so it's more of like a straight line upward before it starts spreading out, whereas before, it started spreading almost immediately with that gun, and same thing with the M277, that is a massive improvement to our initial spread. Even the AK205, which was ridiculously accurate pre-patch, it's even more accurate post-patch. It looks like there's less overall dispersion across the board with that. And this trend's just continuing with all of the carbines. I would say we're seeing improvements across the board here, and not just tiny improvements. These are notable improvements to pretty much every one of these carbines. And that's really nice to see. I would say especially with the M4 and the M277, I've really struggled with how much those just immediately started spreading. It just felt like you never knew where your shots were going to go with those guns. And at least now, if you're tap firing appropriately, these should be working significantly better for you. Then before we get into SMGs, just a quick plug. There is a ton of time and effort and preparation that goes into videos like this. And to my knowledge, nobody else does it quite like this. So if you guys are liking what you're seeing so far with this video and you haven't subscribed yet, there's going to be plenty more of this content to come going forward for Battlefield 6. So make sure you subscribe if you don't want to miss out on that. And let's get into the SMG category. And for many people, they were actually anticipating potential nerfs to SMGs when it comes to their accuracy. Since up until this point, SMGs have been some of the more accurate and easy to control guns at longer ranges. And even though they're dealing less damage at longer ranges than the other guns, they were often still more effective because we could hit our shots really effectively. So this is what it looks like pre-patch versus post-patch. And I was a little bit surprised to find that I'm actually seeing improvements more than anything when looking at least many of these plots, especially when it comes to the maximum spread. So toward the top end of the recoil plots, you can just see there's not quite as big of a bulb at the top there, post-patch compared to pre-patch with many of these SMGs. Like especially with the MP5 and the MP7 or PW5, PW7, those ones are absolutely more accurate post-patch compared to pre-patch. And even the SGX, while there is some variance there we can see from one recoil plot to the other, so it's not going to be super consistent, it still does appear to be a little more accurate post-patch compared to pre-patch. Now, one exception to this is the SL9. It does appear the SL9 is actually slightly less accurate after this update. So I believe they actually slightly nerfed that gun, as we're seeing a little more spread, not only early on in the recoil plot, but also on the top end of that. Although, let's be real, that's still a very accurate gun, and I don't think the recoil is going to be a problem on that at all. But overall, with SMGs, I was actually quite surprised by these results. It doesn't look like they made any significant nerfs to them. They're still going to be quite easy to control at longer ranges. However, at least the gap between them and something like carbines will be shrunk because the carbines did get very noticeably more accurate, much more so than what we're seeing here with most of the SMGs. Now, moving on to LMGs, keeping in mind these are all 30-round recoil plots instead of firing the full magazine for them. This is another one of those cases, just like with the assault rifles, where I'm honestly not seeing any major differences pre-patch versus post-patch. Like when it comes to the L110, for instance, honestly, it looks a little less accurate post-patch compared to pre-patch. Then many of the others look like they're essentially identical, and any variance you're seeing there is just down to the inherent randomness that exists. Like there's no really obvious adjustments there. I will say it does appear there are noticeable spread buffs to the M123K, as well as the M240L. Especially with the early recoil on those, it does appear there's less dispersion there, and surprisingly, it looks like the KTS got slightly more accurate than pre-patch, which is insane because it was already the most accurate full auto gun in the entire game. But overall, I would say you're probably not going to notice any massive changes when it comes to the recoil or spread of at least most of the LMGs after this update. And then finally, for my recoil testing, we have DMRs, and it is worth noting in the patch notes, they also specified reduced recoil and variation for the LMR27, the M39, and the SVDM. So everything but the SVK were not only lumped in with the general dispersion buffs across the board, they saw some more targeted recoil improvements as well. And taking a look at before and after here, I'm not seeing any like ridiculous improvements. Like with the M39 EMR, for instance, there's still a pretty big first shot recoil. There's going to be a pretty big gap after the first shot fired. And then things settle in nice and tight, just like they were pre-patch. For the LMR27, there's definitely less vertical recoil, and it does appear there's a little less horizontal recoil as well. It kicks much more straight upwards now compared to pre-patch, where it was leaning a bit more toward the left. For the SVK, this one still has a crazy amount of first shot recoil, and this one is the one that wasn't stated to have any specific recoil adjustments, so realistically, maybe it's a little bit tighter when it comes to dispersion, but outside of that, recoil-wise, it appears to be the same. And then finally, with the SVDM, there's definitely a little bit less vertical recoil on that, and it does appear the dispersion has been slightly improved there as well. So you should definitely be able to notice with most of the DMRs that they're just a little bit easier to handle post-patch compared to pre-patch. And there we go. Those are all of the recoil and spread comparisons across all of the primary weapons, at least all of the semi-auto and full auto primary weapons. And in general, I'm happy to see this, especially with the carbines. It's nice to see those really noticeably improved. But even outside of that category, across the board, we're seeing some general improvements to many of the guns. Now, toward the end of the video here, I just wanted to go through and pick out some of the highlights from the patch notes that I feel are really worth mentioning as well. Like I said, there are tons and tons of other things mentioned. A lot of them are just like edge case bug fixes. So I'm mainly just going to focus on the things that you're probably going to notice on a game-to-game or even gunfight-to-gunfight basis. And the first big one is aim assist. They have reverted aim assist back to the beta values. And they did describe this a little bit. One thing they were mentioning is with increased slowdown at longer ranges, they saw that this made high zoom aiming feel less smooth and harder to control, and that's exactly what my experience was. Sniping has been painful since launch on controller unless you significantly reduce your aim assist strength. That's how you made sniping feel better, which seems really counterintuitive. You would think that you want more aim assist while sniping, so it helps you get on target, but I often found myself fighting it far too much, and it was actually getting in the way more than it ever helped me. So they did mention with this change, it's going to keep aim assist slowdown consistent across all ranges to help with muscle memory and to help provide steadier, more reliable feel as they move into future seasons. And honestly, I'm cool with this. I think the aim assist felt fine in the beta. I was honestly a little bit surprised to see that they were making changes. Like, I had an issue with how they balanced controller settings and some of the controller feel was off, but the aim assist itself seemed fine. So I do think this is a good change overall. It's not like aim assist is insanely powerful either way. Next up, they fixed an issue where vehicle stick acceleration presets would affect your infantry aiming left-right acceleration option availability. And I had noticed a lot of people mentioning in my settings video, like, why do I not have access to that setting? And I didn't know why that was the case for some people, but not others. But apparently this explains that, and they've got that taken care of. Also, with all of this, it's worth noting, if you play on controller, it seems they've reverted a lot of your settings, and you're going to have to go in and change all of your settings again, which is very frustrating considering how many settings there are and how horribly laid out their settings menus are. But at least once you get everything set up again, everything should feel a little bit better, especially if you're using a PS5 controller on PC. They fixed an issue where stick dead zones were not working properly. So basically there was an additional 10% of dead zone for PS5 controller players on PC. So for those players, things should feel much better after this update. Then after that, they did mention they fixed bouncing behavior when landing on object edges. So hopefully, again, we're going to be seeing fewer instances of little mini trampolines all over the map. Like I've always said, it's kind of entertaining to see every now and then, but it's happening far too often where you just suddenly get launched up in the air. And I believe this is designed to target that. I have my doubts that this will fully fix it, but if this at least reduces the instances of that happening, then that sounds great to me. They also fixed an issue where the Assault class wasn't getting the extra grenade ability on spawn. You were meant to have 2 grenades if you're using the correct perk setup with that, and that wasn't happening. Now you should be spawning in with those 2 grenades, as they mention you should. Another really notable mention here is they fixed mismatched rotation between first and third person soldier aiming direction. And this is important because there were several instances I've noticed where, from my perspective at least, it looks like an enemy isn't looking directly at me or aiming at me. But then I get melted by that enemy and it's just like, what happened there? This guy wasn't even looking at me and yet he killed me. So hopefully this will minimize instances of that occurring, because that can obviously feel really frustrating when you die to that. Another thing that's nice to see is they fixed matchmaking logic to prevent late-stage match joins. That's excellent. There's nothing more frustrating than joining a match right toward the end where there's no chance of you actually making any impact on that match at that point, and we don't have persistent lobbies, so once that match ends, it's not like you just wait in the lobby and are guaranteed to start a new match fresh again. You might get thrown into another match in progress, and that was really, really frustrating. I really wouldn't mind joining games late if we had persistent lobbies, but we don't. Then in the settings, they added a new option that allows you to sprint automatically when pushing the stick fully forward. And they also added a new key binding that allows a player to instantly swap to the knife instead of having to hold the button down to pull the knife out. And then after that, there were just tons of adjustments to audio, some UI and HUD adjustments, and just various bug fixes as well, like I said. But those are all the main highlights I wanted to cover, and primarily, like I said, in today's video, I was mainly focusing on the weapon recoil and dispersion adjustments, which were nice to see, like I said. Now, of course, those are just my opinions, and I'd love to hear what you guys think about this patch. Most importantly, the adjustment to spread, or bloom. Do you guys feel like they finally found a good balance when it comes to that? Or do you think they need to take this even farther, or did they take it too far? Just let me know all of those thoughts down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.